Europe's reluctant awakening, how a continent learned to worry and tried to become a superpower. For most of the post-war era, Europe has enjoyed a curious luxury, strategic adulthood without strategic responsibility. It possessed armies, ministries, and summits, but rarely the burden of deciding whether to fight alone. That burden was outsourced, reliably and cheaply, to Washington. American aircraft carriers, nuclear umbrellas, and presidential speeches performed the role of geopolitical scaffolding. Europe could quarrel about agricultural subsidies and climate targets while assuming that, in the end, someone else would mind the gates. That arrangement is now wobbling, if not collapsing, under the weight of Donald Trump's second coming. His return to the White House has turned Europe's strategic dependence from an abstract embarrassment into a concrete risk. Suddenly, generals, presidents and think-tankers are speaking in unusually blunt tones. Europe, they say, must become a superpower, economically, politically, and militarily, or accept a future as a geopolitical dependency. This is not a revolutionary idea. It is, rather, a rediscovery of an old one. What is new is the sense of urgency, and the dawning realization that the window for leisurely procrastination has closed. The end of comfortable illusions. Europe's security order rested for decades on three assumptions: America was committed, NATO was sacred, and Article 5 was inviolable. All three now look less solid than they once did. Mr. Trump has long regarded alliances as commercial contracts rather than political commitments. Protection, in his view, is something to be purchased, renegotiated, or withdrawn. His renewed skepticism towards NATO, combined with his habit of threatening withdrawal or territorial seizures, Greenland being a notable example, has transformed reassurance into speculation. European leaders are discovering, belatedly, what scholars of empire have always known: great powers do not guarantee permanence. They guarantee interest. And interests shift. The Munich Security Conference's description of wrecking ball politics captures the mood. America, once the self-appointed custodian of the liberal order, now behaves more like its most disruptive shareholder. Its attention span is short, its commitments conditional, its patience minimal. For Europe, accustomed to strategic outsourcing, this represents a rude awakening. The rhetoric of maturity. Into this atmosphere of anxiety have stepped unlikely evangelists of European adulthood. General Sir Nick Carter has warned that Europe must prepare for life without automatic American protection. Emmanuel Macron, never one to miss an opportunity for historical theater, urges the continent to wake up and act like a power rather than a committee. The language is striking. Europe should be a superpower. Shaper of the international order, strategically autonomous. These are phrases once confined to academic conferences and French policy papers. They are now appearing in official communiques, yet rhetoric is cheap. Europe has been waking up intermittently for 3 decades, after Bosnia, after Crimea, after Trump's first presidency, after Ukraine. Each awakening has been followed by a prolonged snooze. The question is whether this time is different. Structural problem: power without machinery. Europe's difficulty is not lack of money, population, or technology. Collectively, the EU and its close partners rival America and China in economic weight. What it lacks is machinery. Defense remains fragmented across national lines. Procurement is duplicated, incompatible and politically protected. Decision-making is slow, consensus-driven, and risk-averse. Weapons manufacturing is scattered. Command structures are layered and cautious. Sir Nick Carter's proposals: integrated procurement, coordinated command, sustained funding for Ukraine, resilience against Russian sabotage, and a new social compact, amount to a blueprint for institutional adulthood. They also amount to a quiet admission: Europe currently lacks most of these things. The problem is political, not technical. Integration in defense touches sovereignty, budgets, and jobs. It threatens national champions and ministerial empires. It invites domestic controversy. As a result, reform advances in increments, usually after crises, and rarely far enough. Europe is strong in aggregate and weak in practice. NATO's rebalancing, autonomy by delegation. Ironically, Europe's push for autonomy is being encouraged by American pressure. The Pentagon's restructuring of NATO, shifting leadership roles towards European officers, is presented as empowerment. It is also burden shifting. The appointment of a British general to lead Joint Force Command Norfolk symbolizes this rebalancing. So does the Arctic mission align with Mr. Trump's interests? Europe is being given more responsibility not as a reward, but as a necessity. This is autonomy by delegation. Washington remains present, but less indulgent. It will support European leadership where it is convenient and retreat here costly. For Europe, this creates an uncomfortable hybrid. It is no longer fully protected, but not yet independent. It must manage risk without full control. The mirage of quick fixes, faced with strategic insecurity, European institutions have reached ambitious-sounding solutions. A 100,000-strong European force. A missile production surge. Joint procurement schemes. Arctic deployments. These initiatives convey seriousness. They also conceal fragility. Consider Britain's Atlantic Bastion project, an effort to rejuvenate naval power through hybrid ships and autonomous systems. Experts have described it as vaporware, technologically seductive, operationally distant. The Royal Navy, shrinking in size, is betting its future on unproven platforms. This is emblematic of a broader European tendency, substituting innovation narratives for industrial depth. Drones, AI, autonomy, and digitalization are treated as shortcuts to power. They are not. They amplify existing strength, they do not replace it. Without sustained shipbuilding, munitions production, and logistics capacity, technological optimism becomes strategic theater. The social constraint, who will pay? The most underestimated obstacle is political psychology. Defense requires money, patience, and casualties. European societies, accustomed to welfare states and low-risk geopolitics, are ambivalent about all three. Sir Nick's call for a new social compact is therefore crucial. Strategic autonomy cannot be imposed technocratically. It requires the public to consent to higher spending, longer deployments, and uncomfortable trade-offs. So far, that consent is shallow. Support for Ukraine remains strong, but conditional. Defense budgets have risen, but often reluctantly. Military careers struggle for prestige. Risk aversion permeates politics. Europe wants security without sacrifice, a luxury history rarely provides. What America risks losing, much commentary frames the crisis as Europe's problem. It is also America's. A weakened, dependent, resentful Europe is a strategic liability. It consumes American attention without reliably amplifying American influence. If transatlantic ties become purely transactional, Washington will inherit a continent that is neither obedient nor autonomous, merely anxious. Conversely, a stronger Europe could become a stabilizing partner rather than a protected ward. But that requires American tolerance for European independence, something not easily reconciled with Mr. Trump's worldview. The paradox is clear. By undermining the alliance's emotional foundations, America may encourage the very autonomy it has long resisted. The deeper pattern, from post-history to history. For 3 decades after the Cold War, Europe lived in what might be called post-history. War was peripheral. Borders were stable. Power was procedural. Politics was managerial. That era is over. Russia's aggression, China's rise, and America's unpredictability have returned history to the continent. Strategy, deterrence, and industrial capacity are once again central. So are dilemmas, trade-offs, and tragedy. Europe is being asked to grow up in public, under pressure, and without rehearsal. A superpower in theory, a consortium in practice. Can Europe become a superpower? In theory, yes. In practice, only if it abandons some cherished habits. It must prioritize integration over symbolism, production over promises, and risk over comfort. It must accept that sovereignty pooled is often sovereignty preserved. It must invest in factories as much as in forums. And it must prepare its citizens for a harsher world. So far, the evidence is mixed. There is movement, but also evasion. Ambition, but also improvisation. Determination, diluted by process. Europe is learning to speak the language of power. It has not yet mastered its grammar. Conclusion: the reluctant adult, the continent's present predicament resembles that of a sheltered heir suddenly informed that the trust fund may disappear. Panic follows. Plans are announced. Advisors are consulted. Old assumptions are questioned. But adulthood is not declared. It is practiced. Europe's dependency on America was long disguised as partnership. Mr. Trump has stripped away the illusion. What remains is an unfinished project, a union rich enough to defend itself, clever enough to design systems, but still hesitant to assume full responsibility. Whether this moment produces a European superpower or merely a more anxious consortium will depend not on speeches, summits, or strategies, but on whether Europe is finally willing to pay the full price of its own security. History, having returned uninvited, is waiting for an answer.